Okay, so I think this should now be coming through. Hello? Hello, hello. So this should be coming through. I think there's always a little bit of a delay I find with the audio. So, plan today, we're going to spend probably about 30 minutes, 45 minutes playing Red Dead Redemption 2 because there is a GCSE exam tomorrow on the American West, and it just so happens that even though what you're seeing right now is slightly outside of the timescale that the exam covers, it's only out by about 15, 16 years or something. So what you're seeing here is pretty much the time period that the course ends in. So we're going to have a play of this for a little bit, 45 minutes or so. We'll have a little think through some of the contents. We'll have a little think through about what might come up on the paper tomorrow, and we'll just take it easy. So if you've got any questions, any ideas of what we can get up to, there are a few places I'm going to show you on the map because it's just really useful and shows off some of what we'll be talking about anyway. But if you've got a particular question or you need help with anything, hello in the comments, then put it in the comments and I'll have a look. What I'll do is I'll probably spend a few minutes just talking about something history-wise, and then I'll keep an eye on the comments, and if there's questions or comments we can go from there. So the first thing we're going to do when we set the map here, we're going to have a look. Yeah, it is actually America. We'll come on to that. Yeah, same time period that St. Paul's Cathedral and all the rest had been constructed or was being finished in. So what we're going to do to start with, we are going to head towards well, there's a city down here, but we're not going to start there. We're going to start where's a sensible place to go? Well, we'll head up towards the mining town because pretty early on in the course we come across the California Gold Rush, so we'll head that direction slowly, and actually I'll show you on the map. The plan is that the American West, the EdXL course, essentially revolves around, well, there's a number of running themes, but it's the general sense and general explanation of how people who settled and lived in the East initially, when the United States of America became the United States of America, when they kicked the British out. That was a nightmare, that was, when they kicked the British out. Can you imagine if Britain had kept hold of America? That would have been nuts. But they didn't, alright? They lost it. So bring it checked out, and even though this is not, geography is not my strong point, of course, but even I can tell this is not obviously meant to be reflective of the actual United States of America. This is not what the map looks like, but we can still get a general sense of the general theme of the course, which is that people from the east, slowly but surely, start to move to the west, and they settle, and they set up towns, and they set up homes. They cross over the boundaries and the borders of the lives of the people who were living here, the Plains Indians or the Native Americans, sometimes called American Indians, incorrectly in lots of ways. And as they spread to the west, the settlers, general white settlers, come up with loads of interesting ideas about how they can farm the land, how they can make the land productive, but they also really struggle with establishing law and order. That is basically a little summary of everything really that falls into the American West, course actually. So what we're going to do, it's worth saying that this game itself is actually it's got a pretty high age rating, but I was having a little scan earlier because we want to be family friendly, don't we, guys, of what the age rating was given for, and it's given basically on the basis of the killing of people and the encouragement of gambling and language, foul language. So we're not going to be getting involved in killing people, gambling, or using foul language. So we should be absolutely fine on that front. But we'll slowly but surely start making our way through. So, course starts at about 1835. I say about, that sounds a bit loose, but that is literally what the year the course starts in, circa roundabout nearby 1835, and it covers. Well, one of the first big things actually that kind of helps towards the settling of the West is that people start moving on wagon trains. I'll show you just briefly what it might look like. From east to west through something called the Oregon Trail. Now the Oregon Trail, I've made a video about this, so if you want to know more about it, go and have a look at that. But the Oregon Trail is basically a path that goes from the east to the west, that would be walked, it would be travelled on horseback with wagons, and thousands and thousands of people took this trail once it had been kind of established to get towards the west. The first people who travel across it do so in about, actually I should say, the first people who do so with a wagon train, taking wagons with them, So going not just to kind of go and hunt something and then come back, but the first people who go to really try and establish a life in the West or travel to the West for long-term purposes do so in 1836. And they're religiously motivated people. They want to go to the West to basically encourage people to become Christians. Basically, that's kind of the simplest way of putting it. They were religious people who were Christians and wanted other people in America, the Plains Indians or the Native Americans, to learn about Christianity, so they moved their life to the West in order to do that. And in their wake, behind, a number of people kind of follow them in the hope that they can go and establish new lives for themselves in the West also. By the time we get to 1849, well, in 1848 gold is discovered in California, and then the trail, the Oregon Trail, that had been used in the first place to help people get to the West, is flooded with thousands of people trying to get to California to make a quick buck by finding gold. So that's kind of where it starts. Well, we'll pick that up in a moment because we're going to arrive in a mining town shortly, and it's probably a good moment actually just to say, I'll just check in. If we've got any commentary questions, it's worth saying I've actually wanted to give a bit of a plug, right? I've started an Instagram account, right? I'm spreading out on social media because I'm realising that the bell on YouTube doesn't really work as well as I kind of hoped in terms of letting people know when we're doing something. But also because for those of you who are doing GCSE exams, as useful as I think some of these streams may be, they're ultimately, they're quite long and you can't really get through them quickly. So I've set up an Instagram account in the hope that I can put up 1 minute, up to 1 minute clips, like 30 seconds clips, 40 seconds or whatever, talking about a given topic, so that if you want to revise, it's as simple as kind of scrolling through the page, finding a topic you maybe don't know so much about or want to revise, clicking it, and then it'll talk you through it in a little bit of detail. So at the moment, I say at the moment, probably for quite a while, I'm only going to be putting up stuff there about Weimar and Nazi Germany, because that is the final exam for this year, which is next week for those who are doing the Edexcel GCSE history exam. There's one tomorrow, if you are listening to this live, that is, and then there's one next week, and then we'll calm down a lot of this stuff. So we just want to get revision stuff out there. So if you have used or found anything useful in the live stream so far, it might be worth following that account and kind of getting some more stuff, especially for the GCSE revision side. It could be useful. So right, we'll head over to the mining town. I'll have a quick look. So let's see. 255 subscribers, yes, 255. I had not, I mean, yeah, I had not expected really anybody to watch at all when we started. So that's good. That's quite nice. Looks like Willie Nelson, John Cash, Classic Americans. Yes, absolutely. Okay, right, good. So we'll head towards the mining town.
Ain't you special?
It's not too far off. I mean, it's worth saying as well, right? Most of the games I've played on live stream so far, I don't actually play in my spare time, right? I mean, some of them I have played, but I don't really play them casually. I've only used them purely for the purpose of trying to help with the revision. This is the exception, right? Red Dead Redemption 2 is the exception. This is probably the game I play the most if I ever get a chance to play anything. So, super convenient for me that I can use it as an excuse to play tonight. Happy, happy days. Okay, so, the California Gold Rush. So 1848, gold is discovered in California and people start flooding over in their droves. Not just from the east in America, North America, but also from China. Tens of thousands of Chinese immigrants travel to California in the hope of finding gold, basically in the river, or with a little bit of digging in certain mountains. So it's a pretty exciting time for most, the idea that you could find, you know, riches just by travelling somewhere and digging around a bit, or panning for gold. So loads of people travel over. Not so many people actually make the money that they're intending to make. So the town we're about to arrive in is symbolic, really, kind of represents what happened to a lot of people. They travel to the west in the hope of finding gold and finding it. Okay, the brilliant marker that I've set for myself there. Absolutely nowhere near where we need to be. We'll head into the town, and then we'll show you a mine. Even though the mine that we're going to see is not a gold mine, they're mining something else. It might be iron ore. It still shows kind of what happened. Lots of people leave their homes, they travel to the west, they travel to California, they cover thousands, miles on miles to make it rich, and they don't. And they end up living somewhere where lots of people have done the same, and they can't really move out, they can't really make progress, and they end up picking up whatever work they can in the towns that are established. Some people, however, make a fortune. I mean, one guy, there's a guy called Sam Brannan who really creatively and inventively becomes a millionaire. He might even be the gold rush's first millionaire, but basically Sam Brannan sees a massive gap in the market when he discovers that loads of people are travelling to California to dig for gold. He travels to California, but not to dig for gold, but to basically set up a shop where he is going to sell shovels and pickaxes to other people who are coming to dig for gold. So pretty smart, thinking outside the box, and he becomes a millionaire. So a lot of the time, and this is a theme actually in the American West especially, lots of people make their fortune not by necessarily doing something, not by necessarily doing the thing, if that makes sense, but not by necessarily digging the gold themselves or selling cattle themselves. Lots of people make money by providing the means by which other people can do that, which is a pretty useful lesson, probably, generally speaking, also. So, the California Gold Rush is super exciting. It moves people to California, moves people to the west. Lots of people end up living here because they've travelled to find gold, and they don't. And it kind of changes, well, it definitely changes California. California is admitted as a state into the Union as a result, actually, of the population growth that takes place. I mean, there's some pretty crazy stats in terms of how many people move. I'm just kind of just checking because I'm sure I saw some earlier. Oh yeah, they're there. So, in 1848, there are 15,000 people living in what will become California. By 1855, there's 300,000 people living there. So, as you can imagine, all these people are not striking it rich, but they are going and they're eventually going to try and build lives. So they form towns, they form communities. There's a high proportion comparatively to the rest of the states of Chinese immigrants, so there's a little bit of racial diversity as well, which comes with some issues because not everyone is accepting of people who've travelled in, ironically enough, to the United States, despite the fact the vast majority, well, all of the white population, generally speaking, of course, are immigrants themselves, but that's not the point, is it? That's not the point. So, so yeah, let's have a look. I'll just see if there's any questions. No. Okay, fine. If we do have any, just put them in. We'll come back every now and again just to see if there's anything that people need or would like to know more about. So what we'll do, we're going to talk in a moment about the railroad. So this is quite useful in front of us. But we're also going to consider when the railroad became particularly useful or particularly prominent in terms of yeah, this is probably a good place to head to for that. In terms of travel across the American continent. So, we're going to head down to the southern area, okay? So even though this is not supposed to be exactly like the United States, this map does kind of show certain aspects of what the United States would look like. So we're going to head to where, basically, it's what is meant to reflect the south, the southern states, where slavery was being enforced, is that the right term? Where basically plantations were, and where people were being forced to work on plantations to produce sugar or to produce cotton, mostly those two things, so that they could be sold by the owners or the overseers. In America, even though slavery has existed in pretty much any group of people that you can look at historically, in America the unique aspect in lots of ways is the fact that you could tell almost immediately who a slave was in America at this time. Well, not the time you've seen in the game, but in the time that we're thinking about, up to the 1860s. You could tell really whether someone was a slave by the colour of their skin. A black person living in the American South up to the 1860s was almost certainly an enslaved person. Which is not the case generally. It was not generally the case that you could tell by someone's skin colour, historically speaking, that they were an enslaved person. It's a unique aspect of slavery in America, but it's a massive issue. Now, for the course, and for those of you who may be sitting the exam tomorrow, there is not a huge focus, bizarrely, on the American Civil War. It is a huge, huge, huge deal. But your focus, if you're doing the exam anyway, is to think about the development of the American West, and the American Civil War, as important as important as it is for discovering and understanding the black experience in America in lots of ways. We don't need to focus too much on the fighting of the war, why it broke out, or anything like that. Our focus is on different laws that are passed at the time that help promote or encourage the movement towards the West of different settlers. So, having said that, you do need to know some of what the whole thing is about, purely because it explains how certain pieces of legislation are passed. So the American Civil War breaks out in 1861. In 1861, when the American Civil War breaks out, there is some... This is a really kind of brief, and it's too simple a summary, but basically, the American Civil War breaks out because Abraham Lincoln is elected as the president. People within the United States are nervous or worried that a previous compromise about whether slavery should continue in the United States is about to end, because Abraham Lincoln is pretty open about the fact he wants to end slavery. He's not trying to do it immediately, but he's willing and able, and he is going to put the pieces in place to ensure that slavery is eventually abolished. So the southern states, or a group of southern states, form their own country, basically called the Confederate States of America. A war is fought, the northern states win, and the Confederate States, or those that make up Confederate States, are brought back into the Union, which is a super brief summary. Again, it's too simple, but whatever. We're pressed for time. But the big consequence of this is that Abraham Lincoln signs into law the 13th Amendment, which outlaws enslavement, outlaws slavery in the United States of America in 1865. Now, for us, for the course, if you're sitting the GCSE exam, the big deal is that because the southern politicians and the southerners leave the Union and form their own nation, what happens is the Southerners are leaving where laws are being passed in Congress in America. So they're removing themselves from the ability to block laws that up to that point they had been stopping. So because they wanted to keep basically a monopoly on land, and they didn't want people spreading to the west, and they didn't want to have to engage with conversations about slavery ending, what ends up happening is they leave the Union, and whilst they're gone, the people who remain in the United States, the northern states who are fighting against them, pass two key laws that help encourage westward expansion. The first one is the Homestead Act of 1862, which basically says if you want to move to the west, you will be given 160 acres of land, and all you need to do is sign up and pay a registration fee. I think it's like $10, I think, off the top of my head. So for lots of people who will never own land otherwise, it's a great opportunity to own land. On the other side, the Pacific Railroad Act of 1862 is passed. Now, I made a video about this relatively recently, so if you want to know a little bit more about that, it's worth checking out for a bit more. But basically, the Pacific Railroad Act states that the government are going to give, essentially they're going to allow people to make money. They're going to sell them government bonds, or give them government bonds which are worth money, and land to build a railroad that will connect one side of the continent to the other. And it works pretty well, actually. By 1869, there is a rail line essentially connecting east to west, and even though the Oregon Trail had been used up to that point by lots of people even though the Oregon Trail had been used by lots of people to go to the west, the completion of the the Transcontinental Railroad as a result of the Pacific Railroad Act is huge. Travel time across the country drops from several months, where you have to go on wagons and horseback, to 1 week. It's easier to move things around, so increasingly it's easier to move to the west. People can make more, people can spend less time travelling to the west. It's easier to take things, to sell them and move them on. Slowly but surely, the movement towards the west, I guess you could say the foot is put down on the accelerator for westward expansion, and people slowly but surely start inching closer and closer to the west. And I don't want to say the western coast, but the idea of the west is kind of enough in itself, actually, as vague as it sounds. So that's the Civil War, that's the Homestead Act, that's the Pacific Railroad Act. I'll just have a quick check if we've got any questions, and then we'll go from there. Now, so far it's worth saying, usually, and I was anticipating, we'd have someone causing a bit of trouble here, right? Usually someone comes and tries to rob you. Now, we're not going to shoot, we're going to time up, if needs be, just for what it's worth. But so far this game has been very well behaved, so we'll keep travelling, but by the time we get to the other side of the map, there is a little mission that might actually highlight some of what the Homestead Act shows, if we get that far, of course, if we get that far. Right, so let's have a look at what people are saying. How strongly was Lincoln's opinions on slavery opposed by other people high up in the government? So how strongly were Lincoln's opinions on slavery opposed by other people high up in the government? Well, he's elected into office, so there are plenty of people in the north and northern politicians, decision makers, who wanted slavery abolished, and it was not kind of a quiet conversation where Lincoln had to force the issue into discussion. People were already openly talking about it, and his election was a big deal because it had become a big issue nationally. What had been happening up to that stage was, if a new state was entering the Union, if a new state was becoming a state in the United States of America, there had to be a trade-off. So for every state that joined as a slave-holding state where you could hold slaves legally, the next state had to be a non-slave-holding state. Now, eventually, once you've kind of coloured in the map and you've got to the end, and all the states are admitted, as it were, you're going to have to make a decision on what you do with slavery beyond that. And that was happening in the years up to Lincoln's election. So Lincoln's election is a big moment because it symbolises that enough people in the country are ready for someone to start putting into place the legislation that will stop slavery. He's obviously opposed by the Southerners, but this is the irony. The Southerners, who want to maintain slavery, leave to make their own country to keep slavery. Then a whole load of legislation is passed that they didn't want in the first place, and then they're forced back into the Union because they lose the war and have to live under the new legislation. So it didn't work too well on that front, thankfully, of course. So good timing actually, because this here shows us what plantation, or it shows us what a plantation would have looked like. Now obviously we're outside this, isn't it? I'm slightly out. We'll get there now. Oh, we'll just keep going further south. So now those of you who've already been listening well will think, well, hang on, if slavery's been abolished by the time this game is taking place, why are these things still around? Well, for lots of people who lived in the South, black people, great, they've got their freedom through the 13th Amendment, but they actually don't have the skills or the opportunity or the education to really advance themselves. So lots of them end up having to live in the South with racist people who would, up to the signing of the 13th Amendment, tried to keep them enslaved. See, there's like a dilapidated, burned down plantation house here. That's part of the story of the game, actually. May have been involved in burning that down when I played through, but that was not anything to do necessarily with what we're talking about, so we'll just move on. So as you can see here, this all would have been previously where crops, cash crops they're called, would have been grown, and then enslaved people would have harvested them, prepared them, and they would eventually have been sold. Now by the time we get to the town that's just up the road called Rhodes, there is you'll see some black people working in really boring tasks in a mill, basically the sort of stuff they would have done before they've gained their freedom. So for lots of people they don't see a massive impact straight away of the Civil War and the 13th Amendment, but still, progress is often quite slow. Excellent. So yeah, anything like that, again, question-wise, is absolutely fine and valid. So what have we done? So we've looked at the Gold Rush, we've looked at the Oregon Trail, we've looked at the different pieces of legislation straight after or during the American Civil War. Yeah, it's worth thinking actually about what it would have been like for these people who are moving towards the west then. So they start moving to the west because they're encouraged to. You've got a rail line that can get you there more quickly. You've got government incentives. You're being given land, lots of people for going. Some people are going because they want to go and find gold. Things are moving along quite quickly. Towns are established along the railroad, it's also worth saying, to try and encourage people in the south who have a lot of cattle to travel to the north in order to sell what they have. So there's a lot going on in terms of moving people to the west and opportunities for making money by going to the west. So these cow towns, they're called, are established along the railroad once it's completed, or at least whilst it is being completed. And it gives people the opportunity in the south to take cattle to the railroad, which is further north, but not in the north, so you don't have to travel as far. You can use a cattle trail, take cattle to the cow town, drop off your cattle, sell it, and then make a profit. So as these towns are developing, obviously this also encourages people to move, to set up shops, to set up businesses, to make money from the increasing size or from the cattle industry itself. There's a lot of positive movement in lots of ways. Now, one of the things that's tricky for lots of people is that it's really hard to make a living in the West. The ground is hard, it's dry. We're going to come on to this in a moment, but the Native Americans have basically been pushed into the West, in part because people didn't really know how to farm the land so well. I've gone right past the town of Rhodes, but that's fine, because actually, looking at time, I think that makes a bit more sense, to be quite honest with you. So we'll, to make sure that we're not kind of overstaying our welcome here, we'll head over to this one. This one here probably gives a nice example of what a cow town is, but actually, given that we're talking about farming, probably makes more sense to head here. So, Yeah, it's a really difficult place to farm in the west. The ground is dry, it's hard, it's dusty. There's not a great deal of rain. It's not desirable land. Now we're going to come on to this shortly, but the Native Americans basically been pushed into the west because lots of settlers, government especially, but lots of settlers don't have much desire for the land in the west because they don't think they can use it very well. Over time, though, people start to oh, nearly that was close. Over time, people start to find solutions to a number of problems. So, one thing people start doing, for example, they start innovating with different ideas about how to dig up the land, even though it's hard. They start using sod buster teams, they start using steel ploughs to dig up the land so it's easier to plant seeds or whatever, or to plant things. There are people who are making a fortune through selling these things. Different inventions of different kinds are all kind of being put forward, and as soon as they are shown to work, they're introduced, they're implemented, and then it makes farming and makes moving to the west more attractive. The fact that it's hard to get water, for instance, that the ground is dry, well, someone uses, it's called the Halliday Windmill, we might get to see one in a moment actually. Basically digs right deep into the ground, it gets water, and it means that it's easier for people to live and to irrigate, is that the word, irrigate? Their crops, and to make sure that things are growing as they should. The use or the invention of barbed wire is a big deal. It stops predators like animals coming in and destroying crops or killing animals. It stops cattle that are being moved across the country, just kind of charging through and destroying things. That's a big deal. And people also start innovating with different types of crop. There's a new crop brought in by a group of, well, they're Germans, but they come from Russia, called Mennonites, who bring something called Turkey red wheat, which can survive in harsher conditions. So people can start farming that where they previously couldn't. So even though this stuff, I'll be honest, isn't super thrilling in terms of, oh, wow, amazing, different forms of wheat, brilliant, I'm really happy to be learning about this stuff. It really does change people's lives, okay, as an example of one of the windmills, or at least a rough idea of what it would have looked like. And I think even though they've got wooden fences here, but if you can imagine barbed wire here instead, that was often really effective in terms of keeping animals where they should and stopping other animals from coming in, so that was a really big deal. And then we're going to start heading up to the reservation, because that's where I think we'll end up finishing off, so it's further north. So yeah, these areas here, this would be an example of like a farm or a ranch where they've got animals that they would be moving elsewhere to be sold. And yeah, this sort of land may be a good example of that originally people wouldn't have been too bothered about securing, but over time, as people find solutions for various problems, they start realising and appreciating that they can make the move to the west, and they're encouraged to do so. I'll just have a quick check for comments, and then we'll go from here. Okay. So let's have a look. The Wayne Industries, the Wayne family. They said that secret railroad saved slaves. Oh, I'm not sure about that. I can't say how active Wayne Industries would have been at this time. I'll be honest. Maybe someone could do a fact checking. That could be extremely useful, and then we can kind of go from there. But okay, so now you've got people moving to the west. You've got solutions to problems that previously put people off moving to the west. Some people are making a killing, some people are making a fortune by providing the means by which other people can move to the west. But there's obviously one thing that we've not mentioned, the underlying elephant in the room, I guess. I don't know if you can have an underlying elephant in the room. The elephant in the room is that people were living on the North American continent before settlers from Europe had arrived and started trying to take control of the land. We're going to call them Plains Indians for the purposes here, because that is the term given by Edexcel and used by them in exam questions and in resources they put out. Native Americans is often used, and already I'm kind of going to be stepping on toes, because when you start lumping in lots of groups of basically when you start using one term to cover a range of different people with a range of different ideas, beliefs, customs and traditions, it gets messy. But at the same time, we just wouldn't be able to discuss all the various different types, different groups and tribes of Native Americans effectively and to do it justice. And so we've kind of got to, for the purposes of what we're doing here in terms of preparing for an exam, we kind of got to go with it. This here is just to give you an example as we're running past. This would be a good example of a homestead. So whoever lived here may have taken advantage of the Homestead Act, paid a registration fee, been given 160 acres of land, and they're using it for farming. People did discover actually pretty soon and early on that 160 acres of land wasn't actually enough to feed your family long term, so a new law was introduced called the Timber Culture Act in 1873, where the government said you can have an extra 170 acres of land provided you plant trees on 40 acres of them, because they wanted to grow more trees. So another attempted solution, not the most effective, but seeing as though we're running past, we might as well just have a quick stop. And then we'll get back to it. So when we're thinking about Native Americans and we're thinking about the people who are already living in the USA, this is another story within the American West. The general story is that the US government and white settlers will push Native Americans further and further west, and then as they move into the space they push the Native Americans or Plains Indians into, they will then start trying to sanitize their culture. They'll then start trying to civilize them. When I say civilize, I mean if you could see, I'm doing the like scare quote thing around the word civilized, because basically lots of Americans, US government officials especially, believe that the culture and traditions of Native Americans need to be rooted out, that they are savages who need to be corrected and taught how to act and speak like the white settlers themselves. Out of the way. Whoa, watch out. So there are a series of laws that really, in terms of revision, a really good way of revising is getting the key terms and dates. If you can get the key terms and dates of different movements and ideas, it's really useful, because the mark scheme encourages the inclusion of these things. But basically, the general sense is, in 1834, just at the start of the course, the Native Americans are pushed beyond something called the permanent Indian frontier. So basically the US government says, Native Americans, Plains Indians, you can have all the land west of the Mississippi, and we'll stay where we are. Over time, as people realised they'd actually quite like to move into the West, increasingly the promises that had been made to various Plains Indians groups and Native American tribes are broken. So as people start moving over into the land that had been quote-unquote given to the Native Americans, slowly but surely new treaties need to be arranged to make it more easy, to make it easier for white settlers to move into the territory. So in 1851, the Fort Laramie Treaty allows or ensures that white settlers can travel through the land given to Plains Indians, and that they're not going to be attacked if they do so. And in return, the US government is going to pay certain groups $50,000 a year if they stick to the terms of the treaty. In the exact same year, though, in 1851, the Indian Appropriations Act is passed, which slowly starts to introduce reservations. So they start paying certain Native American groups to go into smaller areas where they are somewhat restricted, and they will be increasingly restricted, where they can't follow some of the traditions they used to follow, such as hunting buffalo, such as, well, all sorts of things. Hunting the buffalo, we'll come on to, is a super big deal, because this was a huge part of Native American culture, so they're restricted in this way, but they are given food in return for staying within certain parameters, and these will increase. So slowly, as you can see, we go from 1834, basically you lot go and live over there, to the 1850s, an increasing sense of, right, we actually want to be over there now, and as we're finding solutions to some of the problems that previously kept us at bay, we're going to have to do a few treaties with you lot, we're going to have to do some deals. Now, it's really hard for these treaties. These treaties are probably never going to work, because the Native Americans don't see land ownership in the same way that the US government and white settlers see it as. They don't think you can own land. I had a really nice analogy that it's kind of like saying land ownership to Native Americans was kind of like someone telling you own the air that they're standing in, or that you own air. It did not kind of, lots of Native American cultures just did not have land ownership as a concept. So the idea that we stay here, you stay there, made no sense. They were often travelling from place to place for food, for shelter, for different things. It was a completely different lifestyle, so it was a real clash of cultures. So in the 1850s, treaties and deals were put into place especially to try and ensure that white settlers can travel through the lands that had previously been promised to Native Americans. In the 1860s, as more gold is discovered, and more people start travelling through where they'd previously said they wouldn't, conflict breaks out. So this thing called Red Cloud's War in 1866, where Red Cloud realises, actually, we're not going to be respected and we need to fight back. Eventually, another treaty is passed in 1860, is agreed, inverted commas, in 1868, which lessens or tries to calm down the situation that had been caused during Red Cloud's War. But basically, the general sense is Native Americans are told by white settlers and the US government one thing: you can go and live over there. We're not going to get involved. You can do your own thing. So over time, more people having their rights taken from them, being moved into smaller areas of land as the map is coloured in, to eventually lots of Native Americans fighting back. Now, when we get to, in fact, I've been speaking a while here, so I'm going to have a little pause, and we're going to come back to talk about Little Bighorn in a sec, as we're just establishing that some Native Americans are fighting back, and then we're going to have a little exploration around one of the reservations. But I'm going to have a quick look at how things are in the comments, okay? So we've had some fact checking. This is excellent. Right, so couldn't find much on Wayne Industries. Okay, not this time then. Thanks for searching, absolutely. It's baffling to think the historical person of Pocahontas ended up living in Brentford in London. It is, and it is actually. We watched. I watched Pocahontas fairly recently, which I'm a little bit ashamed to say, to admit to. But yes, she did. She did eventually make it to Britain. Yep, they did. So someone just mentioned that settlers used to run. There were tours basically where you'd get on the railroad, travel to the west, and hunt the buffalo. Absolutely, the buffalo were massacred basically by the U.S. government. First of all, when they were building the railroad, buffalo were shot by people trying to feed railroad workers, but they would just basically, it turned into a shooting contest where people would shoot loads of buffalo, they take some food, and then leave the rest of the carcass. Real problem for Native Americans. There's actually a mission in this game, right? If you're old enough to, and you've played this game, you'll know that there's a mission where one of the people you hang around with, right, basically, is a Native American, and he finds some buffalo that have been killed by people, and he's raging because they've killed the buffalo and just left the body behind. It was really important for Native Americans, if you were going to kill the buffalo, that you used every single part of the body that you could for something, for food, for clothing, for religious items or relics. It was super important. So when people started just shooting the buffalo for sport, this was a huge deal, and it really angered the Native Americans, as you can probably imagine. So, again, not having much joy placing markers, so let's find out where we are. Let's see, so, yeah, we've talked about the tours. It is awful. Yo! Disney movie Pocahontas, it's actually quite factually incorrect, especially about facts like her age. It absolutely is. Yeah, she was a lot younger, and she's portrayed in the film, and John Smith, if that's his name, in real life, he's a lot older. So, yeah, it's not particularly accurate. It's been definitely brushed up for the film's sake. Yes, someone's got the details. Great, excellent. Yes, she was around 11 when she met John Smith. Now, yeah, that is not how things are portrayed in the film, of course.
Good girl.
Yeah, not the same at all. Does the map feature Pawnee in Indiana? I don't think so, actually. So, Pawnee, you know, famous location in Parks and Recreation, of course, for those who've not quite seen it yet or got there. But I don't think so. But we do have now. This is probably because of the stage of the game. So this here is supposed to be, well, it is. It was a previous reservation. Now it's been destroyed. Look. So basically, what happened and. Right, so basically, we'll go back to where we were. 1876, there is the Battle of Little Bighorn, where General Custer is defeated by a group of Plains Indians, and it is devastating, because up to that point, even though some Native Americans have been fighting back, the general sense for lots of people is actually that the Native Americans, okay, people were thinking, we might think that they're savages in various ways, we might not like some of their customs, but they're no real problem. They're actually just moving on, we'll keep moving them on, they're not a threat. And if they fight back, we'll take them, was the general sense. At Little Bighorn, when the Native Americans defeat the 7th Cavalry Regiment, I believe, when they defeat General Custer's forces, that sends shockwaves through the country, because now the Native Americans are a real problem. They've defeated a section of the American army. Serious issue. Now, the actual regiment itself that Custer had led show back up a few years later, because they oversee a massacre called the Massacre at Wounded Knee in 1890, where they kill unarmed men, women and children who they have already arrested, and the suggestion often made is that part of the link is in retaliation in some form because of what's happened at Little Bighorn. So it's worth looking up. It's called the Massacre of Wounded Knee, or the Massacre at Wounded Knee, strictly speaking. But after Little Bighorn in 1876, when the Native Americans are seen as a real threat, then there's a real push to put Native Americans into reservations. Now, if you're playing the main story before you get towards the end of the game, which is where I am, you will know that these kinds of these teepees here, these homes where people would live in, there's plenty of them. There's loads of them around. I thought they'd still be here, to be honest. It's a bit underwhelming, isn't it? But basically, there's a group of Native Americans who are forced to live in this location. They are allowed outside of it, but there are bounds or parameters within which they're supposed to stay. They're not allowed to travel out to go hunting. Food is brought to them, and they're basically under house arrest. Their children are taken to be educated in American schools, essentially, or what served as American schools at the time. And the idea is to civilise, in inverted commas, these people, so that they will let go of their traditions, let go of their culture, and act more like the white people around them. So it's a sad tale, actually, and it's a key part of the course. The progressive kind of encroachment and the breaking of treaties and the breaking of promises to basically remove from the population cultures, traditions and customs that people who had travelled, or were the descendants of people who travelled from Europe, didn't understand and didn't really seek to or care to, because they wanted to use the land for themselves. So I'll have a quick check of where we are comments wise, and then we'll have a little conversation about law and order, and we're going to knock this on the head because we're already at 40 minutes. So let's have a look. Let's see. I hope they're all the best raccoon like the movie, though. I don't think so, actually, Miles. Although we did discuss in a previous live stream, Esmeralda's goat is book accurate, so that's nice. That's a nice little touch. Just remember something, but it's on topic. When America celebrates Independence Day, they say it the English way rather than the American way. 4th of July rather than July 4th. That's an excellent point that I'd never thought about. Yeah, they do say 4th of July.
You okay?
It's because oh, my horse's collar is empty. Hang on, guys, I'm going to end up starving my horse here. I've not got much for him. It's because they, deep down, they know that they want to be part of Britain.
Well,
now I know they're never going to admit it, right? These Americans, but they know it's a bad idea leaving Britain, and that's probably reflected in now they say that. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Good point. Yeah, of course, it's around the corner, 4th of July. Maybe we should do something for the 4th of July. I mean, I've got to be honest. I am a sucker for American history. It's the one era of history I just find fascinating. It's such a new country in so many ways. People who set it up were very historically minded, and really, it seems, tried to establish something that would work better than what they'd seen elsewhere, which is a really good sell for the importance of history. Let's go to Valentine. Let's go to the Saloon. That's where we're going to go. And we'll see the sheriff's office, or whatever it is. It's not an office, whatever. Where the sheriff is. But yeah, American history is fascinating. So maybe we'll do something for the 4th of July. I don't know. If it's an excuse to play Red Dead again, then maybe I can get on with that. We should celebrate getting rid of them. Yeah, maybe we should have our own Independence Day. Yeah, seeing as though they want to get going. It's not a bad point. I thought it was ironic. Yeah, I know. Well, there's plenty of irony actually with the American War of Independence, or the American Revolution, because in many ways it's basically a civil war between the descendants of large, European people, or largely British people, against the British Empire. So it's a period covered with irony, and obviously depending on which side of the Atlantic you want to be on, you can have a certain view. Like, here's the train, look. So if you can imagine all the good. Oh no, what's coming? If you can imagine having to take whatever's on that train on a wagon on roads like the one or paths the one like we're travelling, it would have been a nightmare. It would have taken you ages and ages and ages to get anywhere. So big deal, the railroad. So we're going to head over to Valentine, which is the town. We're going to have a look at the sheriff and law and order a little bit, but and that's going to be it. That's going to be it, and it's going to be good luck to all who are assessing the exam and so on. Now, as you can imagine, as people are moving to the west, you don't have a really organised policing system. Now, a few weeks ago, as part of the Crime and Punishment revision live streams, we looked at the police in Britain. We looked at the establishment of the police in the 19th century, 1829, and how that was extended and how it worked. That period of time, 1829, predates what you're seeing on the screen. Okay, so before the course starts for the American West in 1835, around about 1835, the police have already been established in Britain, which is a completely different world to what is happening in America. In America, law and order is pretty much still very much based around community ideas and the idea that you look after yourself. Now, there are a load of myths around cowboys and the Wild West and how wild it really was. But basically, a cowboy's life was you would travel with cattle to a cow town, you would sell the cattle on behalf of whoever had sent you, and then you take your money. Usually, they'd go to a saloon and drink alcohol and start relaxing. Sometimes this involved gambling, sometimes this involved fighting, sometimes it involved shootouts, or shootouts. Shootouts. But that was relatively rare. A cowboy's life was basically you travelled with cattle, you lived out in the open, you travelled back home or back to where you'd come from, or you found another ranch to go and move cattle from, yeah? So the kind of glamorised life of the American West with, you know, duels at high noon or whatever at sunset is not the reality for most. Now, having said that, we're going to go to a saloon and see if we can get involved in some of it, but it's worth flagging that up. What is true is that law and order was not very well established, okay? So the US government did set up marshals who were supposed to be enforcing the law in different districts, in certain areas, and there were sheriffs who were set up within certain towns and smaller areas within what the marshal would oversee to try and enforce the law. But even though that system was there, it wasn't very effective. Not at all, actually. I'm just having a quick check because someone has made a very nice reference to what we looked at when we looked at the policing in Britain. So let's just see, just in case. Good point. Celebration of longer being associated with America. I'm up for it. Okay, let's do it. Oh, I don't know what it involves, but we could. Why do none of these people bear arms? It's been very low. If you're on about the game, it's been very well behaved. No one has threatened me once. I've hardly seen anyone as we've been roaming around, but it's still good. It's still good. It is a very good game. I agree. John Peel, Sheriff Woody. It is Rob Peel. That's the one, Bobby Peel, which is why they're called Bobby. So excellent. Either people who just love the history of the police system, or people who watch the live stream, or maybe both. But so we've got a system of marshals, we've got a system of sheriffs. They're supposed to be enforcing the law. It doesn't work very well. Now, a really nice detail of this game, I don't know if this is intentional, but there is a series of missions where you serve or you kind of work alongside the sheriffs in one of the towns, but the sheriffs don't know who you are, and you're actually doing a really poor job, and you're there for your own reasons. Kind of sums up the sheriff system in the American West and how it works, really. So, basically, good sheriffs, or people who... I should rephrase that. People who generally were able to keep things under lock and key, a lot of the time, were able to keep things under lock and key because they went around with guns and were able to beat people up themselves if they needed to. The sheriff, if it was, you're going to be effective in stopping law and order, you basically had to be able to stop certain things happening without relying on the police turning up, or without relying on certain levels of support that people in Britain at the time, at least, could rely on, such as uniformed people who would turn up or patrol certain areas regularly. In America, what was happening is, a lot of the time, people would sort out their own disagreements with guns or with fighting. Again, it was not common enough. It's not as common as the movies might have you believe, but that was the case. There was a guy called what's his name? Is it Bill Hickok? I think Wild Bill Hickok or something. And he was notorious for basically being involved in a lot of shootouts and punching up of people. Wyatt Earp, who was the marshal, oh no, he wasn't the marshal, but he had served as a marshal elsewhere. Wyatt Earp went to do some law enforcement, basically, in a town called Tombstone. Excellent name for a town, for what it's worth. And he was involved in a really notorious shootout. I don't know what's happening. Oh, right. Oh, that's what's happening. I'm walking in front of the carriage. But Wyatt Earp was involved in a really famous shootout, something called OK Corral, with a gang of people, basically. Here's the sheriff, look. You'll probably will be the Sheriff Malloy, so we'll say hello, we'll be polite and friendly. Of course. And we'll have a look. So, it's not that there weren't people around, they often wore stars as badges, so you knew who the sheriff was, but a lot of the time, those who were effective, well, I don't know if they were effective, but those who gained a reputation for not having people mess with them, they got that reputation by being pretty handy themselves with guns and all the rest. Oh, my calls are low. Right, we best eat something quick, even if we've only got a few minutes left. So here we've got some cells, look. He's been up to no good. Probably been fighting in the saloon or something, I imagine. Oh, hang on. Benedict Albright. Should we find out? This might have been someone... There's like some bounty hunting missions, actually, and sometimes people did serve, obviously, as bounty hunters, so people could make money by going and arresting or capturing people that local law enforcement officers couldn't. Right, he's not... Oh, crikey. Alright, calm down. So, so some of them, as you can see, were pretty eager for a scrap, so that's not a good sell. But you can see, if people have got arms, right, guns, and they've got easy access to them, you can see how these things can escalate pretty quickly, can't you? So, we'll go into the saloon, we'll have a little look, I'll have a quick check for questions, and then we're gonna knock on the head. So let's see. Did Jesse James know he was named after both parts of Team Rocket? Oh my goodness, no, I didn't know until just mentioned. An excellent observation. An observation and a half, quite right, Fiona. Jesse, there's a really good film about Jesse James. It's called... I'm going to get a beef stew here, guys, because I need something. It's called The Assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford, which is a huge spoiler, but it's very good. And part of that film is an inspiration for part of this game, actually. Especially in terms of one of the train robberies that takes place. So if you're into slow burn westerns, where not much happens for a long time, but it's kind of a character study, then yeah, definitely worth a look. Now we're going to have a haircut, as I just have a quick check whilst the cutscene plays. Yeah, why are so many people getting pressed? I don't know. It's one of the problems, right, with this, is you run through a town and someone's got an issue about something. Right, I'm going to go for... I think I'm going to go full mustache only here. So we'll get the... we'll get rid... Or we'll go for some sideburns, shall we? No, we'll keep the sideburns. And we'll get rid of this. So...
Work this good, I ought to up my prices.
Nice. And I think we'll have a new lid as well, dropping into AJ's. Oh no, we'll just put some wax there. There we go. That's much better. Brilliant. So, just very quick. Oh, hang on. There's another spoilery title dropped in the comments. Apparently, there's a book called "They Both Die at the End." Yes, that's yeah, that's pretty spoilery. Yeah, but sometimes it's the journey, isn't it, guys? Not the destination, of course. So, it's iconic, isn't it, going through... feels iconic, anyway, going through saloon doors. So, basically, we'll just do some quick summaries then. 3 general stories for the American West. There's as different entrepreneurs and innovators come up with new ideas to travel, as they invent solutions to problems that have kept people from moving to the West, more people, unsurprisingly, start moving to the West. Pretty... self-explanatory, pretty simplistic, but it's a reality. People discover gold, more people move to the west. People discover a way to farm in areas that previously people had found hard to farm in, people move to the west. Laws are passed that give people land for moving into the west, people move to the west. It's quite straightforward in that sense. But as people move to the west, they're coming into conflict with, and they are encroaching on the grounds and the areas where other people had lived before, leading to all sorts of conflict and dangers. And as people move further west, they also put a serious strain on law enforcement and law and order, which is not effectively applied in any way. I'm trying to think if there's anything else. I mean, for those who are sitting in the paper, the questions for American West, the first one is going to be explain 2 consequences of something. If you are stuck and you don't know what it is, it could be, say, explain 2 consequences of the Homestead Act 1862. That'd be great if that was the question after today, but whatever. If you don't know what it is, a really good thing I find to put in that often will gain you a few marks is to say that one of the consequences of whatever the issue is that it accelerated westward expansion. Generally speaking, most of the things you are asked about, because this is what the whole course is about, most of the things you're asked about, if you say it accelerated westward expansion, it will generally be correct. Not always, and obviously, hopefully you've done enough reviews so this doesn't happen, but if something comes up, say, explain 2 consequences of the Timber Culture Act, or explain 2 consequences of the Fort Laramie Treaty, generally, most of these things, one of the consequences is an acceleration of westward expansion, which means more people start moving to the west. The more detail you add as a result, as my horse there has a poo, the more detail you add in between about people set up towns, or they set up businesses, or they set up ways to make money, they start interacting with each other, there's more racial diversity in different places, the better. If you can match that, if you need 2 consequences and you really don't know, generally speaking, most things result in either the expansion, an acceleration of westward expansion, or further encroachment on the lifestyle of the Plains Indians. Okay, generally speaking, again, Homestead Act, Timber Culture Act, Pacific Railroad Act, all of these things, generally speaking, lead to more people moving to the west. They also generally lead to encroachment on the way of life of Plains Indians. So generally, you might get 2 marks if you just remember that and you put it in. It's very vague. Obviously, hopefully you've got more, but it generally should help you out. Then there's a question about writing a narrative account where you've got to link certain things together. Make sure you read the terms of the question. Basically, make sure you read which dates the question is talking about. Because sometimes you might, if the question, for example, was write a narrative account analysing the way the cattle industry changed between 1876 and 1895, which I think came up recently. If that's the question, and you start talking about the cattle industry in the 1860s during the American Civil War, you're outside the parameters of the question. It's a horrible question. What is word, right? I hate this paper. I think this paper is awful. Like, I really don't like it. But it is what it is. We've got to get through it. So just make sure you read the terms of the question, and make sure that each paragraph, you've got to write 3 paragraphs, you've got 2 bullet points, and you've got to put them into order. It's a horrible question, but obviously this here now should just be recapping, given this is tomorrow. Make sure that you've got a general theme that runs through your whole answer. So if it was changes in the cattle industry, it could be about different ways that people made money, or the ways in which the cattle industry changed in terms of there was an increased focus on using the open range or using wider areas of land. Just choose a theme that can be travelled through your answer, and make sure, or carry through your answer, the end of each paragraph offers something that links to the start of your next paragraph. So your first paragraph should end with a link to your second paragraph, and your second paragraph should end with a link to your third. And then the final question, explain the importance of something for something else. I hate this paper, right, guys, because question 1, explain 2 consequences of something, and then question 3, explain the importance of something for something else, are so similar in my mind that it will feel probably that you might be overlapping and repeating. But don't stress too much about that. For this one, you choose 2 of the 3 options, and choose a consequence of something immediately is a good idea. Make sure you're talking about both things. If the question is explain the importance of the gold rush of 1849 for westward expansion, make sure you're not just talking about the gold rush. People were looking for gold, full stop. Make sure you link it into the westward expansion. Make sure it extends across both. And that's it, really. I mean, another little trick, right, a little tip, a little hack, I guess you could say, right, is sometimes, if you really don't know, have a look at the other questions on the paper. Because if you have a question like write a narrative account of something, well, have a look at the other bullet points given for the other questions, because it might be that one of the questions somewhere else might prompt an answer that you can give. For example, if the first question is explain 2 consequences of something, and you do not have a clue what the thing is, I've given you 2 options you could write, but what you could also do, you could have a look at the question right at the end. Or, question 2 or 3, really. Look at the bullet points given. They may end up triggering something that you know. You think, oh yeah, actually I do know a little bit about this thing, and then you can go and write it down. The third question, gives you a number of things, because the question has to. If it's going to ask you to give the importance of something for something else, it's necessarily giving you a few things about what is happening in the time period. It might just be, if you're lucky, that one of those prompts might link in some way to one of the other questions, and it is perfectly valid to use information from another question to answer another question, okay, in your answer. A lot of the time, when markers get their answers, they don't even mark someone's paper entirely. They might only mark a particular question. So, just as a heads up, use your paper if you're really stuck, if you need to. That covers all exams, not just history. You don't want to be repeating yourself, obviously, but use what they give you the best that you can. Alright? So, let's have a look. Final questions. What are the questions for the year? End of year exams. Do you know what? I know what they are now, but I can't tell you. Of course. Although that could get me some good traction here, couldn't it? That could get a few people watching if I maybe that should be my next clickbait title. End of year questions revealed. Get a few more people watching.
All right there.
Might get Red Dead 2. Got to get a PC first. I'm on the PlayStation 4 for what it's worth. But I'm sure it looks much better on the PC. Yes, it has gone on. It is one of the longest ones, but we've got through, or at least touched on, most of the GCSE. So we're happy with that. We're going to knock it on the head. Please don't forget, if you haven't already, it's worth following on Instagram for revision clips for those of you who are doing the Weimar Nazi Germany test. But that's it, right? Let's call it there. Have a good night. Thanks very much. Tra.